In the grand scheme of things, the WWE Universal Championship was short-lived, with it only being introduced in 2016 and it effectively being swallowed up into the lineage of the WWE Championship when Roman Reigns became double champ in 2022. But that doesn't mean there weren't plenty of great performers to hold it during that period, 8 of them in fact. And in today's video, we're gonna rank each holder of that title from worst to best, starting with our number 8 pick, Finn Balor. Now, we don't choose Finn Balor for the spot of dead last here because he isn't talented. No, this is a man who, prior to ever setting foot inside of a WWE main roster ring, had already proven himself in America, the UK, and Japan by becoming a 2-time NXT champion, a 1-time Rev Pro British Cruiserweight champion, and a 3-time IWGP Junior Heavyweight champion. So to say he's any less than a top-level performer would be a lie. Unfortunately for him, though, despite being given the honor of becoming the inaugural Universal Champion almost immediately after debuting on Raw in 2016, Finn's run with that particular belt would be cut short by an injury he picked up during the match in which he won it. Yes, while going to war with Seth Rollins in the finals of a tournament to crown the champ at that August SummerSlam, the Irishman would suffer a torn labrum in his shoulder during a spot where he was powerbombed into the ring apron. And while he was able to go ahead with the planned finish of the match regardless, by the time all was said and done, the fact that he was unable to lift the belt over his head was an early sign of just how hurt he was. Needless to say then, this set the internet ablaze as everyone hoped for the best but feared the worst. And unfortunately for both those fans and for Finn, on the following night's episode of Raw, the worst would indeed be confirmed, as it was then the new champ came out to the ring and announced that, yes, he was in fact injured. So, because of that, he'd be forced to vacate the belt with immediate effect, meaning his run with it lasted for all of 1 day, and saw him, through no fault of his own, get to do absolutely nothing with it. If things had worked out differently and he hadn't gotten hurt, could he have had a better reign? Absolutely. In fact, it's entirely possible this would have firmly established him as a main eventer in WWE going forward, as Vince McMahon certainly appeared to be high on Balor up until this point. But alas, that's not the way things worked out, and so, as a result, we can't rank the Judgment Day members' time with the prize any higher than 8th. And that means it ranks below our next entry, a title reign which wasn't well received to say the least. Whose time as Universal Champion are we talking about here? Why, Goldberg, of course. That's right, there have been a lot of periods in his career when Goldberg holding a world title was exactly what fans wanted to see, but unfortunately for him, 2017 was not one of these times, as by this point, he was no longer the 30-something force of nature who had set WCW ablaze during the late 90s. Rather, he was a man in his 50s whose role really should have been to work with younger talent and help put them over. And what a perfect opportunity he had to do this then at Fastlane that year, as he was going up against none other than Kevin Owens, one of the hottest younger members of the roster at that point in time. So this is why it was so disappointing to so many when, rather than put KO over strong here and set him up for a big world title showdown against Chris Jericho at the subsequent month's WrestleMania, Bill steamrolled through his opponent and proved yet again that in the world of 2010's Vince McMahon, the only real stars were the stars from bygone eras. Hell, this is evident in the fact that such a win wouldn't be the only time Goldberg held the Universal title. No, after his first reign ended with him dropping it to Brock Lesnar in an admittedly fun match at WrestleMania 33, he'd win it again 3 years later. And this time, the audience response to such a move would be even worse. Why was that? Well, this time, he would be defeating The Fiend in order to take home the gold, a character that had all the potential in the world then, and who was only just starting to overcome the questionable booking of Hell in a Cell the year prior. Just think how great a WrestleMania main event we could have gotten in 2020 had it been The Fiend defending against Roman Reigns, 2 of WWE's top homegrown stars, proving that the next generation truly was ready. But once again, Vince McMahon didn't believe that new generation was up to the task, even when we were talking about someone as great as Bray Wyatt was, and so instead, he chose to strap up Goldberg once more. And what makes this choice even worse in hindsight was that Goldberg never even got to have that planned match with Roman Reigns at Mania, because of the state of the world in 2020. No, rather than this big money main event taking place, it would be Bill taking on a last-minute substitute and dropping it to him in just 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And that last-minute substitute is our number 6 entry as it happens, the monster among men, Braun Strowman. Now, like with Finn Balor, it's not really Braun Strowman's fault that he had a pretty poor run with the Universal title, as his was marred by the fact that for the entirety of it, the world was in shutdown and no fans were allowed in attendance at shows. Really, we're pretty sure you could have given the belt to Daniel Bryan or AJ Styles at this point, and even they'd have struggled to make anything memorable out of it. But that was the task Braun was given following WrestleMania 36, and it was a task he ultimately failed at. Not that he didn't try, of course. No, despite the plan never actually being for him to win the belt in the first place, with him only doing so once Roman Reigns temporarily took himself off the board as a result of health concerns, Braun did everything in his power to have some fun matches and segments during his reign. And this was what led to moments such as him fending off both John Morrison and The Miz at that year's Backlash. What Strowman's run with the Universal title will really be remembered for, however, is his feud with The Fiend, as that was what made up the majority of it. And while The Fiend's spooky antics fit in perfectly well with the cinematic nature of what was much of lockdown wrestling, it wasn't enough to elevate this reign any higher. No, for as wild as the pair's Wyatt Swamp fight at July 19th's The Horror Show at Extreme Rules was, it wasn't a patch on other cinematic bouts such as the Boneyard match or Stadium Stampede. And with it being at SummerSlam just 1 month later that the Monster Among Men ultimately dropped the gold to Bray, it meant there were no further chances for him to establish himself as someone deserving to be ranked higher in today's video. Is this a shame? Sure. As while Braun isn't exactly in that upper echelon of greatest wrestlers in the world, if he'd been given a chance to have a run with the gold while fans were in attendance, then he would have almost certainly had a better time of it. Hell, if nothing else, at least the energy live crowds put into the proceedings would have made things feel a little more exciting. As it stands today though, with the Universal title being no more, there's no chance of the North Carolinian getting his second run. And unless there's a catastrophic collapse of main event level talent in WWE, we don't see him stepping over the likes of Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, or Seth Rollins anytime soon by becoming WWE Champion or World Heavyweight Champion again anytime soon. But let's move away from Braun Strowman for now, and on to our number 5 entry instead, someone who, for as great as he was, never seemed to get that great reign with the Universal title. That's right, we're talking about Bray Wyatt. Okay, this one hurt, because had he not tragically passed away so young and so suddenly, there's a good chance Bray would have gotten another run on top, and without Vince McMahon there to ruin everyone's fun, there's equally as good a chance he would have actually succeeded in finally making it what he wanted to make it. But alas, that's not going to happen now, and so of his 2 go-arounds with the Universal title in 2019 and 2020, we've got some good moments, but never quite as good as they could have potentially been. Sure, Bray tried his best to turn these runs into something, particularly his first reign in late 2019 and early 2020, as this was when the Fiend character was still somewhat fresh, with it having only been introduced the summer prior. And with that gimmick proving to be a quick hit with fans then, it should come as no surprise that the boss decided to rocket him up to the world title picture on Raw. But this ended up being the wrong decision in the end, because while fans loved The Fiend, they didn't necessarily want to see him be pushed right up to the top of the card so fast. No, what that character really needed was a year or so of just destroying everyone on the roster before he made his way into the title scene. And so, when he beat Seth Rollins for the gold at October 31st, 2019's Crown Jewel then, it all felt a little underwhelming. Was this helped by the disaster of a match from the month prior at Hell in a Cell when he first challenged then-champion Seth Rollins for the gold? Not quite, but now that he was the champion, Bray tried his best to make the whole thing work. And he appeared to be doing a good job of this with his defenses against performers such as Daniel Bryan and The Miz over the months which followed. That was up until he ran against a Bill Goldberg-shaped wall at February 27th, 2020's Super Showdown. Yes, it was a disastrous way for things to end. But at least Bray's second run with the Universal title later that year helped him to recover, right? Well, not really, because this run, the one which began with him beating Braun Strowman at SummerSlam, lasted all of 7 days and was pretty much just used as a setup for Roman Reigns to come back and debut his new Tribal Chief character by annihilating both The Fiend and the Monster Among Men in short order. Honestly, whether we're talking about his first title run or his second, Bray Wyatt deserved better than this. And the fact that he never got that truly is a crime. But at least things are going to be looking up from here in terms of today's video, because our number 4 entry is the first one you could say had a legitimately good run, and that person is none other than Kevin Owens. Now, you don't need us to tell you how talented Kevin Owens is. All you have to do is watch the work he's put out throughout his career, whether that be in places such as Ring of Honor and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, or on the WWE stage at either Raw, SmackDown, or NXT. And Triple H is all too aware of this, which is exactly why he pushed for KO to be the one to win the Universal title in 2016 after Finn Balor was forced to vacate it. How would the Canadian get the win here? Well, that would come during a Fatal 4-Way bout on the August 29th episode of Raw, pitting him against Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Big Cass. And now that he was the champ, Owens would be tasked with establishing what was, at that point, still a brand new belt, and making it feel like it was anywhere near the level of the WWE title over on SmackDown. Luckily then, he was more than talented enough to do just this, as over the months which followed, the new champ was able to string together a series of successful and hugely entertaining defenses against the likes of Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, and Braun Strowman. And as if that weren't enough, it was also while holding this belt that he gave us one of the best WWE storylines in recent memory, his bromance with Chris Jericho. That's right, the unlikely alliance between the Montreal native and the boy from Winnipeg, as their friendship just felt so pure, so lovable, it didn't matter if they were heels. No, fans wanted to cheer for them anyway, and that was why it cut like a knife when, on the February 13th, 2017 episode of Raw, KO turned on his partner during the absolutely brilliant Festival of Friendship segment. Still, at least this would lead to a big blow-off match between the pair at WrestleMania 33 for the Universal title, right? Well, not quite. No, rather, Owens' title run would instead end with a whimper the month before at Fastlane, robbing us of what should have been a major world title showdown on the grandest stage of them all. But even if it ended badly, at least the rest of Kevin Owens' time as Universal Champion was great. So great was it, in fact, that once it was over, the belt felt like a real world championship on the level of the WWE. And this reputation as being a prize sought after by the top stars of Raw would further be boosted when our number 3 entry first won it in 2019. The one, the only, Seth Rollins. Yes, you could make a very solid argument that of all the wrestlers in the world today, Seth Rollins is the absolute best when it comes to delivering once the bell rings. Hell, that's exactly why the company crowned him their inaugural World Heavyweight Champion once that belt was revived under a new lineage on Raw in 2023. But this wasn't the first time the Architect was holding the top prize of the Red brand, as 4 years prior to that, he'd be beating Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 35 to win the Universal title. And what a great decision this turned out to be, because with that being a period where Seth was arguably at his hottest, he was the perfect person to carry the weight and become the workhorse champ after such a lengthy period of Brock being the absentee title holder. Yes, now instead of only seeing their champion once every couple of months, fans would get to see the top dog show up on Raw week in and week out, defending his gold on a regular basis. It didn't matter if it was AJ Styles at Money in the Bank, Baron Corbin at Super Showdown, or anyone else who wanted to step up to the plate. The Davenport native was always up to the task of stealing the show, no matter who his opponent for the evening was. And this meant good times for fans of in-ring wrestling everywhere. Sure, things would hit a snag once Brock Lesnar won the Money in the Bank ladder match and subsequently cashed in his contract on Seth at Extreme Rules to take his title away. But this would only be a momentary blip as it turned out, because by the time SummerSlam rolled around that same year, Rollins would have won it back again. And now, having toppled the Beast twice then, the champ felt that much more emboldened to go out there and show what he could do. Unfortunately though, this was also where things started to fall apart, as that was the point The Fiend got involved. Yes, we were about to reach that infamous Hell in a Cell match. So perhaps it should be considered a mercy then that just a few weeks later at Crown Jewel, the Drip God would finally drop the belt to Wyatt, with him never winning it back again after that. And we say this is a mercy because even if he was no longer champ, at least Seth was now free to rebuild himself without having to carry the weight of a brand on his shoulders while he was doing so. But let's move on from that now, and on to our number 2 entry, and a man who for a long period of time pretty much defined the Universal title. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but Brock Lesnar? Now, if we're going purely on the number of reigns, then there's an argument to be made that Brock deserves the number 1 spot here, because as the 3-time Universal Champion, he holds the record in that respect. Of course, those 3 reigns wouldn't mean much if they didn't include good storylines or matches though, and luckily, the Beast was able to provide this throughout. It all started at WrestleMania 33 in April of 2017. That was when Lesnar won the Universal title for the first time when he beat Goldberg in a great sub-5-minute match. And from there, now the undisputed final boss of Raw, he'd continue his path of destruction by spending the next year plus destroying opponents such as Samoa Joe, Braun Strowman, AJ Styles, Kane, and even Roman Reigns. Sure, he didn't show up every week, and this was a problem for many fans, but when he did arrive, you knew business was going to pick up. Hell, so strong was Brock booked here, he'd even go over Reigns in the main event of WrestleMania 34, despite being the heel. In the end, though, Roman would manage to win a rematch at SummerSlam a few months later. But that would only be a temporary run, as it happened, because he'd be forced to vacate the belt with immediate effect due to serious illness. So, needing to crown a new champion fast then, WWE returned to the Beast by making him Universal Champion for a second time at November 2nd, 2018's Crown Jewel show. And from there, he'd hold on to the belt all the way up until WrestleMania 35, with him successfully defending against such performers as Braun Strowman, Daniel Bryan, and Finn Balor, all before eventually dropping the gold to Seth Rollins at the Showcase of the Immortals. Even then, though, this still wasn't the end, as after winning the Money in the Bank contract we mentioned earlier on May 19, 2019 at the titular pay-per-view, he'd eventually cash in on Seth at Extreme Rules and start his third reign on top. And while his absentee nature meant he didn't get to do anything with the gold during this third reign before he dropped it back to Seth at SummerSlam, this is still enough to earn him the number 2 spot in today's video. But he's not number 1 though. No, realistically, the number 1 spot can only go to one man. The man who held that belt for 1,316 days, Roman Reigns. Of course, Roman has had more than just one run with the Universal title though, and if we're basing our rankings off of his first run back in 2018, then this list may look pretty different. Not that Reigns wasn't good then, it was more that he was still in the period of his career where fans were loudly rejecting him on account of Vince McMahon continually trying to push him down our throats in lieu of going with more overstars like Daniel Bryan and Seth Rollins. And to be fair, his first go-around with the top Raw prize was also hampered by the fact that, only a few months into it, the Florida native would be forced to vacate when illness took him out of action for the immediate future. Thank God then he would recover from this, and while he would spend the next couple of years continuing to struggle to get over, that all changed when in August of 2020, he turned heel, won the Universal Championship for a second time from Bray Wyatt, and introduced the world to his all-new Tribal Chief character. And this would be the moment when everything turned around for him, as now with one of the greatest gimmicks in wrestling history that was designed for fans to boo him, Reigns quickly became the best thing about WWE. Yes, it was here that the Bloodline saga began, with the head of the table soon bringing his cousins the Usos under his heel as he created a dynasty around himself. And all the while he was doing so, Roman continued to keep a stranglehold over the Universal title. It didn't matter who challenged him. John Cena, Finn Balor, Kevin Owens, Edge, Daniel Bryan, Rey Mysterio, everyone fell to him. Hell, even his own cousin Jey Uso would be dispatched of with relative ease when he at one point attempted to usurp the throne. So dominating was Reigns here that by the time WrestleMania 38 came around, he'd have unified the Universal and WWE titles by beating Brock Lesnar, with this making him the undisputed WWE Universal Champion. And at that point, things reached another level altogether because, with Sami Zayn and Cody Rhodes now both entering the orbit of the Bloodline storyline, things would be able to hit another peak when at February 18th, 2023's Elimination Chamber, he'd beat Sami. And then at WrestleMania 1 month later, he'd do the same with Cody. And following on from this, he was able to pass the 1,000-day mark as champion. And by the time Mania 40 came around then, and he finally dropped it to the American Nightmare in the biggest match WWE had put on in decades, his reign was 1,316 days long, a world title record in WWE which has only ever been beaten by 3 men, Hulk Hogan, Bob Backlund, and Bruno Sammartino. And for those reasons, we have to name Roman Reigns as the greatest Universal Champion of all time. But then as we've seen today, for as undisputed a fact as this is, it doesn't mean every other Universal Champion didn't make their own mark in their own way during their respective time with the gold.